Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Great to have everyone back and enjoying it. Sorry, we're going to make this a little better next time to put the case into the group before we break up and make sure that you have it available and try and put it in PDF as well so that you don't have difficulties opening up documents. And then just to give everybody a brief explanation before they start on the process, but I'm sure that most people have put it together well. I mean, group work is quite common. So we basically have had people having groups facilitated and somebody recording it. And I think just for some feedback now, we don't have too much time for feedback. I'm going to just give you some brief ideas of the focus that we needed to have captured in the group discussion and that you can try to share so that we can highlight the key learning points from today's meeting. So you've had basically a scenario that's been put before you. And in that scenario, you basically have got two questions. It's a scenario which I think, all of us would say is pretty common. We all see this kind of thing amongst us. And the two questions are basically, what ethical principles and theories do you see evidently expressed in this case? Now, a lot of you got dug into actually, what is going on and what's right and wrong and how right and wrong could be explained. And I want you to, I hope that you've actually stepped back a little bit and said, what is it that we're using in the way in which we are arguing a particular case? What theory, what principle? And perhaps from the report back, you could share some of that you have. We'll try and get at least 4 groups to speak to that. And then for the next question, what improvements in governance would you suggest at a clinic and a district level? I think this is again about how are the elements of structure and governance that you think you would try and do. And of course, I think as practitioners on the ground, just simply talking to simple tools and reflecting on that question a little bit of power and authority and accountability, you might be able to think that through in the response. So I'll leave you to now speak to it as groups. I'm going to try to pick out the groups. We'll just take group 1 and go alternate groups on the first question. So maybe someone from group 1 would mind just sharing with us in that first question. I'll just share the documents so that we can remind you of the question. So it's essentially this question here, which we want to focus on. And that's really the key question. What are the issues that we are going to think about in that question? So let me just leave it at that. And we'll make them 1 and 2. So anybody on group 1 and 2 that would like to step up? I mean, I'm not sure who was there. Sanshira, you were there. Who was leading the group discussion? Please feel free, and we still have interpretation. So I didn't see anybody coming forward needing French speaking, but we will still have the process captured for you. Anybody? Saidu? Yes. All right. El Hadi, are you in group? So alternate groups, El Hadi, which group are you in? Go ahead, El Hadi. Rashida, too, you can't unmute. Let me just double check that there isn't a problem. Sorry, might have said something wrong. So let me just be careful I don't go all over the show. All right, sorry, I didn't allow you to unmute yourself. Now you should be able to unmute yourself. So let's just get representatives of the different groups who would like to speak. Please feel free to just unmute yourself. Okay. Pick up your hand and then we can allow you to speak. Otherwise it'll be a bit, so pick up your hand and then we can let you speak. But go ahead, I think, El Hadi, you had your hand up. Or Rashida, yes, next. Go ahead, El Hadi.
Thank you. We are in group 2.
Good.
Yes, you are in group 2, a group of 10.
Right.
I lead the discussion. There is a very rich discussion and talk in the case provided. We agree on unique answer for the both two question, and we summarize it. And Ruby can present it. Okay.
Ruby,
Ruby?
just pick up your hand.
I may invite Ruby to present.
Okay, so
Go
I'm
ahead, Ruby.
unmuted. Hello.
Good, Ruby. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So hello, everyone. So on behalf of Group 2, addressing the first question, we realized that from the conversation between the two nurses that the principle of justice was not being adhered to. And so they felt that the manager had been wrongly treated for actions that the lab technician had taken, which were wrong, but because he is connected politically, he's getting away with it. And so we also observed that there was lack of a code of conduct, and we saw that there was no clinical charter that was being used in the clinic to inform the expectations of patients and the service delivery by health workers. We saw a poor organizational culture, which enhanced the lack of recourse to any law or code of conduct, as we had earlier identified. We also observed that it appears that there was a shortage of staff with respect to personnel allocation and availability of resources, which gave the nurses the impetus to behave the way that they were doing in the face of a whole long queue, winding queue of patients waiting to be attended to. We found also that there was no proper channel for managing complaints. And so we thought that communication channels should be introduced for addressing these challenges. Now, on the ethical principle of beneficence, we saw that the manager was not getting she was not being rewarded for calling out the lab technician for his actions. So that's our response to question 1. Thank you.
Okay, I think you've covered improvements as well in governance structure. Is that not what you also talked to as well, isn't it?
A bit of that. Yes, we talked to that. So would you like me to just...
Yeah, you can just finish it, just briefly.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
On the second question, we identify that the clinic needs to have in place management tools which are participatory in nature and allow for staff and patient ownership. We also thought that policies should be introduced to allow for the easy differentiation of roles so that tasks are carried out more efficiently. We saw that there's a need for governance and resources for jobs to be carried out should be made available, because when there are no resources, when there's deficits in human resource and the equipment and clinical inputs, it makes the work difficult and it allows people to develop bad attitudes, and the patients ultimately suffer. We also found that leadership is required to ensure the smooth running of the clinic. And then there's also the need for a human resource management plan. In addition to the HR management plan and clinical manual or charter that we talked about earlier, we also are of the view that there's a need for a procurement guideline to take care of stock management and avoid shortages when there are emergencies. Okay, and then there's a need for continuous professional development training for staff so that they can keep abreast with the trends and the best practices that are available. Finally, we thought that there was the need also for a continuous review of the challenges and in the facility and any successes that have been chalked to help guide planning for the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's
Ruby.
it from us.
Thank you. Appreciate the quite a robust feedback. So thanks. I just want to, I think you've given some really useful thoughts. I want to just challenge people to ask this question. And this is some of the challenge in our ethical reasoning. I actually, in the case, never mentioned resources at all. There's no mention of resources nor the shortage of staff. And it speaks to the fact that sometimes our personal psychological biases, the way we perceive things, can actually introduce other elements in our decision-making. And this is part of the problem. Sometimes also we need to be able to unpack what is the ethical challenge exactly. In other words, where is the ethical problem? And if we were to unpack that particular ethical problem, so again, think about that. Which one is the real ethical dilemma in this particular thing? And how do you actually unpack the ethical standpoints around that particular ethical challenge? I'm just raising that as a thought point. I see others have their hand up. Some people have put their hands down. So Yakubu, you go ahead. You've got your hand up. Feel free to unmute. I can help you unmute. And I don't know if there are other people who've also stopped discussing. The challenge is to sit and ask, where's the ethical problem? Because it's very easy to kind of get lost in the detail of lots of different things being talked about, the rights and wrongs. And
sorry, my
to crowd it. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, my confusion was with regard to the group number. It seems to me that we were group 2.
Yeah, don't worry about it. I think because people are not raising their hand to respond, we've moved on. So I think you can, whoever can share it. I think the more you share, the better it is, amongst the group members. Maybe they're a little shy to share. But Yakubu, if you are able to share from your group what kind of discussions there are and focus on that question I'm just raising. Are you able to?
Okay.
Or anything that you can raise, no problem. Go ahead.
To give some details of what we shared.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. You'd like someone else to? I didn't get that. You are saying get someone else.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, there's Ibrahim. I think Ibrahim Bello, you've got your hand up, and then Rashid. Sorry, Rashid, you had your hand up first, but put it down. So let me give you that chance, and then Ibrahim.
Yes. So regarding the ethical principles,
no problem. Good, Ibrahim, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. So regarding the ethical principles and theories that is expressed in this case, we observed that we observe some wrongdoings, and that is on the part of the laboratory scientists. So we took the samples home to his private practice. So as well as the nurses who are relaxing when patients were queuing, and even to the point that one is in pain and has to walk away. So we expect the manager to issue out the necessary disciplinary measure. So in as far as we consider that justice justice is not served in this case. And we also noticed that, like when they said the manager did not follow procedure according to the new labor law. So find that there's self-interest. So there's an aspect of ethical principle which is beneficent. The action of the nurses is not beneficent to the patient in totality, and even though they may think that maleficent, that they didn't mean harm. So, but again, we consider the action of the laboratory scientists, even though it didn't mean harm, but it's there's some degree of with self-interest. So which has to do with benefiting himself at the detriment of the detriment of the district hospital. So we found two principles infringed upon: one, justice; two, beneficence or non-maleficence.
No problem. Thank you, Ibrahim. I think that when you're looking at the principles, I think it's usually about, I would argue principles separately from theoretical approaches. In other words, you'll have to think about a particular action, and that's usually some sort of act. Is there the sort of principles followed? The idea of theories is to sit and look at where does the argument come from, generally broadly. So let me just add that in. I don't want to speak too much. I want others to sort of contribute. So thanks for that, Ibrahim. Let's give Rashida an opportunity. Yakubu, when you're ready, you can pick up your hand. Go ahead, and then we've got other people who can add to that. How are we seeing some of these challenges? And I think the ethical principles, I think, that have been spoken to in some ways, and this is typical of exams, is in any setting, one must ask, what is the case telling me, and what are the kind of principles being talked to? Here's the sort of ethical dilemma. You took a lab test, and the other ethical dilemma, or sort of wrongdoing that you could say, is that this person's been sitting there since, you know, that a particular time. So those are the two things where wrong and right might be questioned or appear apparently wrong. And then from there, we can look at these two elements, which are more corporate governance, that there was something about governance, the way in which things were supposed to work, that are not quite working that way. Rashida, to go ahead. Any group feedback or any comments on it?
Thank you. With regards to the group feedback, I think colleagues that had previously commented and said it all. I think at the end of the day, what we actually see here is that the patients are at the tail end of receiving the worst outcomes. So the principle of equity and that of malfeasance, they do no harm comes into play. Because when the structures are not in place, there are no ethical, there are no interest to do things accordingly, then the patients are at the tail end and they are receiving the worst outcomes. Because this emanated from an internal issue wherein the manager suspended a lab technician for doing something wrong, and at the end of the day, that suspension was overturned due to political interference or some sort of connections, and this got all the staff angered, and they failed to do their duties. So this just points to the fact that if these things are not addressed rightly, if the issue of governance is not addressed rightly in our district or clinics, hospitals, then the challenges will be with the patients. That's my comment.
Yeah. No, true. I think one can see the dilemma there. And I think that in a way we could have standpoints, and it's not as easy to sort of take a standpoint on this because it's a complex argument and it's a complex problem. There could be people but the key in this module and this exercise is for us to be more aware of how we are arguing and how different people are arguing and what they're utilizing as an argument basis for their argument, and to be able to step back from that. So good, thank you for that. Ibrahim, your hand is up, go ahead. Then Rashida, I think you've spoken. Ibrahim, then Lindani, Mr. Lindani, Malebo, Kwabena. We've got lots of people who want to speak, which is really great. Sorry, Rashida, did you have your hand up again? That's fine. Go ahead. Ibrahim, if you're not speaking, Mr. Lindani, go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. Thanks a lot. I think a lot of colleagues have touched a lot of issues. Prof, you have a little bit touched me a little bit here. Okay, I know that the scenario says they are earning some peanuts.
Yes.
So which may have affected, I think, the behavior of the colleague who decided to do the procedure but not doing it in the practice, but doing it in while he's working, is doing it in his personal practice. Within my groups, we also talk about the issue of the principle of autonomy, because this procedure was meant to be done in the workplace. Then the colleague has decided to take it and do it in his own work area or space, which is a private practice. There is an element of accountability. And I think when I'm talking about leadership as well, because I don't want to repeat some of the issues or points that were raised by the good colleagues before me. There is a reputation element as well as a moral issue that is affected by the act of this colleague. But the issue of accountability on leadership, it needed to come in, because I think I felt like in a scenario, the leadership didn't come up to actually address these issues. Prof, I think I'll stop there for now. I think somebody want to come in, but a lot of issues that we raised, they covered our.
Not a problem.
Hello.
I think, yeah, go ahead. So who's speaking?
Hello, Fumilola. I think looking at the comment that they said they are getting their peanuts there from their private practices, and all the staffs are doing this. You know, there is something they are expecting, which is not being done by the government. So there is a kind of unmet expectation. Maybe possibly these staffs might not have been paid for so long, which we are experiencing in our own country. Most of the local government staffs and the PHC staff, they are not being paid. And if at all they pay them, they are paying them in percentages. Some will be receiving 14%, which is nothing to take home. And meanwhile, the government facility is there, and nothing is available there for them to work also. So they are seeing it as an opportunity for them to be able to meet their own unmet needs also.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you, Funmilola. At the end of the day, I put this case because, in a way, it's not uncommon. But the way in which to respond, because this was in inverted commas. In other words, what the lady said. In some ways, this is part of the challenge that you're going to have to be as a manager. If you're going to be a sort of managerial person, you have to be paying very careful attention to the information sources, because that's really how you look at it. You've got to look at the facts first, and then be able to make judgments as to how you, in fact, proceed. And the judgment can be influenced quite strongly by your own sense of groupthink. And remember what we talked about it, because you have that shared experience that we are not getting money. So this makes it somewhat more correct, because my experience is that. But one has to be very careful, because the case itself doesn't necessarily warrant that. It might be true, but you've got to be careful of that. So I'm just pointing that out, that awareness of the facts before you and the way in which you respond are part of the challenge. But you're right, that is the big dilemma. And there could be arguments like you are making to say, well, he's right. You know what? To earn private practice, and he felt he was not getting it enough. So that might make what he did, taking the lab test home to his private practice, as his way of, dealing with the imbalances. But that doesn't make it any more right. So it's about that kind of debate. And then, of course, it's about saying, well, how do you address some of these? This is what questions, if you have to deal with some of these ethical challenges, you have to look at, does governance appreciate that difficulty? And do we set up structures to try and deal with it? Should one not be looking at staffing, costs and staffing, income, etc.? I think these were some of the ideas that came home, that one needs to perhaps examine these issues. Is there poor pay that actually makes this problem worse? So I think these are some thoughts. So just to respond to you, and I mean, in a way, there are lots of these theories kind of coming through, but they're not impacting in a way on this particular case. So you've got to ask yourself, what ethical theories are actually being used? And we kind of pointing to things like autonomy. There is not much in the way of autonomy that's mentioned here. In a way, there's no ethical dilemma that's affected by autonomy as the idea goes. So you've got to be careful, and I particularly used word like rights, etc., and Christian, but you've got to ask yourself, what is the actual ethical arguments, and where does the arguments come around? What are they using? And that's what I'm trying to get at. So good for you to think. Good, Malebo. Any thoughts from you? And then we'll go down the line and try and get everyone to get a piece of a statement in so that you get to see. So the key is this, is that of, you know, what is the sort of approach being used, and how do we think through the slides, the particular presentation and the ideas in the module itself. Go ahead, Malebo.
So, Prof, I think the more this case is being discussed, a few things are coming out. And now I'm looking at the text that you've highlighted. He took the lab test home to his private practice. It's not very clear whether he was doing wrong or right. It could have been that he took the test to compensate for the lack of resources, even though there is no lack of resources, that being said. But I think in general, what we picked up from our group was that the consequentialist theories came out much more, where we found that the technician has got an egoistic approach, self-centered, at least that's what we said at that time. Even though now I'm seeing it as slightly different, I think it could be different. But also the fact that the manager didn't follow the protocol, even though she was duty-bound and just based in how she does things. We found that generally the challenges were the chain of command was not in totality, is not followed. That's right. Where the technician is protected by a politician, and the district manager felt that she can be controlled by politicians as well, and nobody is doing what they're not, policies and protocols are not being practiced as they should be. So maybe there's also ambiguity in the policies. They're not clear for everyone. The mere fact that the nurses are just sitting around for 2 hours, not attending to patients, not doing triage to assess who needs help and all that. So there are quite a lot of challenges. And then of course the group membership challenges are coming out in terms of the statement where they're saying all the staff is doing it and we are all being paid peanuts. So that means that we will all not do what is expected of us simply because everybody, you know, it's a mentality. So yeah, those kind of challenges are coming out for
Absolutely. Good. I think that's really the key. And I think you've touched on it. And let me just quickly share, because then at least it'll make sense to everybody. The slide that I presented in a way is what you talk to, and I think that's exactly right. So it's about you thinking through, you know, a lot of the other slides are not so useful, they talk generally, but I think, you know, it's you thinking about, well, you know, what's the way in which they argued it. So you use the word, you know, what was the outcome? Well, this person actually did something that was more their self-interest. So it wasn't the best outcome for everyone, and it isn't what everybody thinks is good for them. And in a way, it's based on this idea that not results based, but that one needs to have justice and do that. Then that was his taking of something. The person who was not following procedures, she did a duty, but that is the duty as defined, which she thought was what she was given as a policy maybe, and guidance, which didn't come to her, but is just rules in the government. But she may not have been given that kind of guidance. So she did a duty, but was she wrong in not doing what was given to her as a duty? So I think these are, and then of course, you know, you're judging character in some ways, but there's not much in the way to argue that case. So I think, Kawabena, great stuff. It's about applying this, and it has a very strong link to the next question. So great, thank you very much. And I think that's the kind of thing that you have to ask yourself. It's not about the right and the wrong behind this. It's just being more finessed in using these theories, in thinking how you will you know, approach an argument or to back your argument, etc. Good. At managerial level, you have to do it. Thanks, Kobena. Well done. So let's go to Ebi Kapai. I hope I've got that right. And Danny, good. Go ahead.
Okay, yes, Prof, you got that right. Actually, the last speaker had addressed some of the concerns I had.
That's right.
In terms of the resource constraint, where in the facility, maybe there are no resources for this test to be done. And then you're also thinking of the best interest of the patient. So you may be constrained and wanting to get the test done at where you think it is most feasible. Not probably because of financial gains, but you're thinking that, oh, this has to be done for the best interest of the patient so that the patient can also get well. So there are these circumstances that may come. So I feel that you have done a whole lot of justice in the discussion around what are the facts before you as you take this decision around the ethics, around the circumstance. And this is part of the dilemma that we continually face in most times. And I think it's something to really look at the facts before you take a decision. Thank you.
Good. And I think that out of this discussion comes the next one. How do you then structure your policies, your organizational governance to clarify and to put out the facts? In other words, this is okay and this is not. This is what should be done. And usually there's substantial issues and procedural issues that confound many of the challenges in terms of governance. So just think about it. It's a particular problem in human resource management. Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to think from a deontological point of view.
Sure.
What is the outcome of the act? If I follow the wrong procedure, but I end up with the right outcome, probably I had the right intentions. Now, reflecting on the last comment you've mentioned about what should governance do in examining actions or inactions of people, I always try to encourage people to say, what was the outcome intended to be achieved? If I'm a practitioner and I realize that my client needs some bit of help, but the healthcare system is inefficient to deliver that help, what do? Do I let things be, or I take actions that is appropriate enough to save a life? I think from that standpoint, somebody can judge the right or wrong based on that. So, but it's like you've shared, it's not a question of right or wrong based on the perceiver, but it is an interpretation which anyone can make based on the realities and context that they are living in. Thank you.
And I think importantly, like you point out, we all have our own approach to deciding right and wrong. We obviously in this process must sit back and ask ourselves, how are we making this decision? How do we think? Is it about duty? Is it about divine will? Are we looking at outcomes? Is it my self-interest involved? How am I thinking? But as a manager, you have to actually appreciate many people in the space of your management sort of space think differently, and you have to be able to perceive how they're thinking and then be able to argue or find ways to reconcile that thinking and to examine the facts in the light of that thinking. So thank you, very good. So and as I say, I want to get to that point of how do you actually take the second question on, which is to look at simple structures and simple ways of improving, strengthening governance, because there are lots of gaps, and that's where the problem comes from, where we as managers, we have these dilemmas, we try to manage them, but we need to be proactive, and that is how you build the, you might say, the governance structures and the governance policies up. I think, Danny, you want to speak again, and then we've got Kwabena and the Mungaro. Okay, we'll have to close it there because I think we've run on in time, and we want to close it and hope that people get value out of this in thinking through this whole module. And of course, you've got time to think. You've got to read the module again, think about the case again, and then there's some stuff that will come on the Google group, so you have plenty of time. So Kwabena and Mungabo.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof.
Yes.
Two things that were, okay, so I'm looking at the governance structure as a management consultant,
yes,
in solving issues, I usually like to promote solutions. Number one,
yes,
the issue of conflict of interest from management level, where someone at the top felt it was okay for the lab guy to do what he did, and therefore reinstated him. A management conflict of interest policy ought to be put in place. Number one. Number two, the introduction of technology would help solve quite a number of issues, because for example, samples for lab passes through some technological phase in presentation. Obviously, it can be tracked, and the lab technician will find it very difficult to have to want to take that sample home and go and do it, because obviously, one, the presentation, two, the process, three, the result will have to follow that track in the technology system. And once one aspect is missing, then we know something's gone wrong. Application of technology and institutionalization of conflict of interest policy could help strengthen governance structures at the district and clinical level. Thank you very much.
Very good. So I think you have tools that you can use and building up information. If I may say that, really as has been just put out forward, the key is this management policy, which you have to ask yourself, is it there? Is it clear? So for example, can one take things home? Is it not clear enough that that is something not allowed? Is there not a code of conduct, etc.? Would that not be placed? It's same, for example, with the way in which a patient who is waiting in a long queue and who might fulfill the criteria of being, let's say, in need of immediate help. How does one handle that? And these are the kinds of situations, they come up because of experience. And then we say, no, this needs to be dealt with, and we build it into policy. But there's also policy that we pick up, this person, actually, it was not a political connection that made him get reinstated. It was actually the HR policy, that the labor laws said something, but that did not translate into clarity at a district level, where they knew how to do things according to the new labor law. And that is why they didn't do it. So the clarity that's required is, does the department at district level actually put out a clear policy on how people should be done? And this person might have done the wrong thing substantively. But the truth is, if the procedure is not followed, that can be a leg by which justice can be served, or in this case, injustice, but it's part of justice, that even though something's wrong, the procedure for actually disciplining a person has to also be right. And many people fail to appreciate procedural elements in terms of the law or the policies that you set up. And many managers do very badly at procedures. They don't follow the procedure, they don't set out a procedure, and it's particularly a problem in HR. So I'm sure when we get to that kind of module, you'll think about it, but it's really important for you to know that policy is there, it's transparent, it's known, predictable, and something that you can then implement predictably, and then you don't get this kind of challenge. So Paul, I'm gonna have to say, let's call it a day there. Paul, Danny, I think you've spoken, so let me just say, Paul, let's call it the last. Otherwise, people are going to disappear as time is run on.
Yeah.
Thank you. And please, we can keep this discussion going on the Google group, so don't let it stop.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Go ahead, Paul. We'll call you the last, and whether we'll close from there.
Yes, Prof, thank you very much for quite a learning experience. I am just wondering, one of the problems we experience is how many of our communities, patient and that actually understands what are these policies. Are they informed? How can they on the policies play within duty bearers, but rights holders does not have enough information about those policies. And I think it's high time that communities are actually engaged to data collection, to monitor health systems, strengthening so that they can be able to hold accountable duty bearers. So that's very, very important. So that area is quite is a gap.
Absolutely. And in fact, nobody picked up on this point. I kind of put a challenge of governance in the case where we actually talked about that clinic chair committee person actually doing work like guiding, queues. That's not their job. So there's clearly a problem in terms of the way in which participation of communities is seen there. And this is, again, what Paul is raising is precisely the challenge that one needs to be very careful how governance is actually really inputted, and our blind spots in seeing problems of morality and particularly governance. Thank you, Paul. So Danny, sorry, you had a point I think you're raising here on focus. I think the question, go ahead, Danny.
Yeah,
the procedural focus is, you're saying, is Europeanized. I'm curious about why you think so.
I was just trying to tickle you over that, but I wanted to emphasize this though. What I have seen in most of our healthcare system in Africa, there is the overemphasis on the policies and procedures. And then you find a scenario, for example, in Uganda, where you have very well elaborate policies that are not put in practice.
Absolutely.
So in a scenario where you have the people that come from maybe a different thinking, is it not necessary for us to reimagine maybe a better approach? Maybe we focus on what is the intention of a healthcare system. Who does it serve? Who should we look up for? Is that outcome achieved? Then probably we can work backwards to see how the procedures can be effected. Otherwise, we are stuck with having governments failing to recruit more health workers because they have to go through the nitty-gritties of what and what, and it wastes a lot of time.
I agree, Danny, but let me ask you, Danny, a military government with a dictatorship can actually say our outcomes are actually, we're achieving things, and they could be. I mean, there were military dictatorships in history that produced the goods for their communities. Problem is that that is not the only way to go about it. So just to come to the question of procedures, and I think you're completely right. We do need to reimagine, and we do need to apply ourselves. And I think, as was mentioned before, we do need to make our policies much more contextualized to our community circumstance. It was one of the dilemmas, in the ideal circumstance, this is the right thing to do, but our policies don't speak to that very well sometimes. So we need to, your point is spot on. But I think procedures, we must not think that that is a European concept. I give you an example. When a chief sits down, does a chief just say, I decided, you came to me and you said he wronged me? Does a chief just decide like that? Or does the chief say, no, our culture is, you come and tell me your story, you come and tell me your story, and then we will have people around us who will then do it. I'm giving you a certain amount of time to do it. That's exactly our culture in Africa. That's Ubuntu. We think about others, and that's how we think procedurally. That is the kind of thing we need to do. So we don't need to think that procedure is a problem issue. But if we don't do that, sometimes we can be applying other principles and we might find challenges. So in a way, we must think the ethics of not only content, but also procedure. And I think all these things, there's no right and wrong. It's about how you argue and think it through. And I think you're completely right. Okay, I think let's stop here. I know that Ebi Kapaya, you want to say one last thing? I think I don't want our listeners to sort of just disappear quickly. So I want them to all end on a high note. Ebi Kapaya, last one, I'm going to leave it. I know this is a very hot topic, but I think I hope it's tickled you to think a little bit more clearly. Use the module to go think it a little more clearly. I know there's a lot of repetition, but discuss it with other people, and we could have other sessions and use the Google group to think it through. Go ahead, Ebi Kapaya. Last one, and that's it. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to still be able to talk. I think the discussion is a whole lot, and somebody has mentioned what is the key thing that was part of the discussion that is lacking in the healthcare space: primary constituent accountability. And the framework I was able to understand recently looks at three components: giving account, taking account, and holding to account. Are we giving account to the beneficiaries of what we do, what needs to happen, how it is being done? Then are we taking account, taking feedbacks from them? As in, this is how we want services to be delivered to us. This is where we are not getting it right. And then holding to account, how are they involved in the decisions that are being made day to day in the healthcare service delivery space? I think that is the framework that is missing. So if we don't get that into place in the principles of primary constituent accountability, we will not be able to deliver services appropriately to the beneficiaries who are the community members that the services are being delivered to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ebikapai, and thank you all very much. That was really high note, lots of very good food for thought, lots of food for thought from everybody. There's no rights and wrongs, it's how you think, and that's the idea in this session, is to get you to think more clearly and to actually think how you try to get the right thing done as a manager to try and implement these structures. So please go have a look at the module again. This entry will be still going on. This is taped, so you can still go back, look at this video. There are 2 videos there. So please go look at the AfroPHC website. You'll see the links to all of this. Good luck with your studies. We'll see you next month. And please plod on. Don't give up on your studies. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, Prof. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Bye, Prof. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
See you next month. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Prof, will we have the slide, please?
Everything will be on the website, so have a look at it there.
Thank you.
Everything there.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please contribute on the Google group.